Welcome to the Dr. Broadway Podcast, the musical theater history podcast where a couple of doctors sit around and talk about Broadway. I'm your co-host, Dr. Kristin Stultz Pressley, joined as always by Dr. Tracey Brent-Chessum. And Tracey, today we have reached the end of the line for now. Season 2 has come to an end, we think.
We're trying to close it out. Yes.
I'm looking forward to summer break. Yes. I don't know about you.
The thing was, I think we got on here today and we both were like, oh, we missed this one. Let's pick it up next week. Like, we'll just pick it up in next season. It's just been that kind of a season. We've put out twice as many episodes as we did in our first season.
Wow.
And it's just
incredible.
Been like churning. We've been churning these out.
Yes.
And we still feel like we're a little bit behind the eight ball. Like,
that's right.
Keep coming forward and people are like, but what about this one? I'm about to see this one. And
we're like, oh crud, I forgot that one.
I know.
But
when this episode airs, it should be the beginning of June, and we are going to take a little break.
Yes.
Before
we need it. I don't know if we deserve it, but we need it.
Yeah. We definitely need to get yes.
Yeah.
We are dying.
Yeah, that's right. We need to come up for air here.
So
tell us
at the end of every year. At the end of every year, we, as academics, we have to list everything that we did that somehow puts, a feather in the cap of the university. So I have to list all of these episodes that I do within the cap. The amount of paper I'm writing formal bibliographies for our podcast.
That's awesome.
It was like a page and a half. And I was like,
that is awesome.
Okay, we did some stuff this year.
It's a lot of work. And I was thinking the same thing as I went through to put these notes in. We have a shared Google document that we use as we go through the episode, and we save all of our notes. And it's like 152 pages of notes for the 2 seasons. So it's awesome. It is a lot of information that we have shared, and it's been invigorating. I was telling my husband last night, I'm like, I so enjoy these conversations with Tracey because I have learned so much just in the discussing of it. When you can read a lot and know a lot, but you make connections in your brain when you talk them through with someone else who knows the stuff too.
Yeah.
And so it's been really
and so many of
instructive for me.
Are, so recent, like being able to talk about the recent stuff as a historian rather than as a critic, I think has been incredibly helpful, especially for me. But it's not something I can really do with students either because, they have a whole bunch of other stuff to learn. I can't give them this other thing I'm like, can you go look this up and, figure this out? So this really has been, we're having a great time. So
We are. Thanks for indulging us as we talk. Yeah, I was going to ask you that. What are we doing today?
We're doing the oh, wow. Y'all, it's the last episode. Okay. Today, it's the Buena Vista Social Club, which comes out, I believe, in 2025.
That's right, 2025.
And is still running.
It is still running. And Tracey, I think I don't remember if we were recording when I talked about this or not, but I remember vividly. This, of course, is music that we'll talk more about exactly where it came from, but it came into the public consciousness across the world in 1997 by way of an album called Buena Vista Social Club. And I had the album. I thought I was the most sophisticated and urbane 20-year-old on the planet, that I had all of this Cuban music. Yes.
Cuban
yes.
music.
It was the, the height of the world music craze. It was everywhere. And I don't remember. I would have gotten this CD one of two ways. One was like I got Audra McDonald's first solo CD, going into the listening stations at Barnes and Noble and being sucked in by what I heard. But I think more likely it was my membership to Columbia House Records. I think this one came in the mail.
On another podcast that they were like, I'm still paying Columbia House. I can't get out of these. Like, I've been doing it for years and they keep finding me. I'm like, this is hilarious. For those of you that don't know,
it's true.
There were these like CD companies that would prey on poor, unsuspecting college students like us.
That's right.
And
That's
be
right.
like, we'll give you 10 for free if you promise to buy 10 over the next 2 years. And I was
50
like,
years.
I'm like, I'm totally going to buy 10 albums. And now
Might as well.
Totally. Yes. Here's the thing. You never do buy enough to get out of them, and it never works. And then the clock starts over, and then it's like,
That's right.
You just got to be very... You gotta learn. You gotta know the system. You gotta know the game.
You do. They would send you a new album, like the album of the month. So it's kind of like a book of the month club for CDs, and before that, cassettes. They probably did it with like vinyl as well. I don't know. When I got in the game, it was all CD. And they were, I mean, every magazine, and there were magazines back then, and every newspaper, and there were newspapers back then, would have these big ads for Columbia House, and that was my drug of choice. But there were other record companies that did it. BMG, I remember the BMG one. You would be like, pick your favorite 10 albums, and then every month for a cent, and every month for the rest of your life, we'll send you an album that you can pay full price for, or you can send
pay
it
more
back.
than full price for. You can pay, right. $2 more than. So it doesn't seem that big of a deal. But if you have to pay that for 50 years,
that's exactly right.
CDs are no longer coming to your house.
You don't even have. If you gave me a CD, Tracy, I would have no means with which to play it at this moment in time.
I have to dig out a old computer with a CD-ROM to try to do that, and that's 4 computers ago, guys.
Yeah, I know. I would, if you gave me a CD, I would look at the title and then go to Apple Music and say, "Do you have this? Here's the title," and pop it up and play it. But it was one of those two ways. It was either through a Barnes & Noble listening station or through Columbia House Records. By the way, I hope they never find out where I live, because I probably owe them
not
$16.98 or something like that. And that's one of those two ways that I got this album. Regardless, I loved it. I felt so sophisticated. It is so earthy, and it's just amazing. And so this show uses the music from that album, which came out in 1997 and swept the world. I mean, it was everywhere. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But it uses that music to tell the story of a real life event, something that really happened. So this one is based on a true story. The book is by a playwright and screenwriter named Marco Ramirez that I'll talk about more in just a minute. But it tells a true story, though he took a lot of liberties with it and the telling of it. And it's essentially, I mean, by definition, a jukebox musical, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're using a catalog of songs that was not written for the stage in order to tell a story. So by definition, that's a jukebox musical. I've never heard it referred to as that, but as I was, pulling together my thoughts for this episode, I thought, what is it? If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it must be a duck.
This is what it is.
Yeah, that's right. So let me tell you the story of this show, which is one of the shows I really want to see. And I think it's because I loved the album so much. But when you watch even the sizzle reels and videos that the show's made available, it is so lush and beautiful. And it looks so graceful, and it's just different than we're used to seeing. Oh, no, it's not an anomaly, but it isn't the norm at all. I mean, we've certainly seen Latin music on Broadway many times, so it's not an anomaly. It's certainly not the first of anything, but it stands out because it's not the norm, and it is.
Well, all of the music is in Spanish.
All of it, yeah. So I'm glad you said that. All the music is in Spanish.
And that's not, like, I wouldn't necessarily think that it would be still running if that was the case. I think it's a huge been running, testament that it is still running. So it's good, and even with, in many ways, like a language barrier issue.
Yeah.
People are still going and enjoying it. So
that's right. That's right.
Because most of the time, if you did this, it would just close.
Right.
Right? It would close very
absolutely.
Quickly. Because everybody's like, well, I don't know what's going on. Well, obviously people do.
Right. And in fact, I went in, which is a strength of Marco Ramirez's book, right?
Yeah.
Now, though Tracey pointed out the lyrics to the music are all in Spanish, the dialogue is all in English.
Yeah.
So don't fear, I won't know what I'm hearing, because you'll totally understand the dialogue. It's all in English. But I was in New York for Broadway Con when they were putting, decorating the theater, not decorating, but, hanging the accoutrements. For this show. And I remember thinking first about that album and how much I loved it. And second of all, that'll never last.
No, yeah.
But it's run for over a year so far on Broadway. So it's going strong. And again, I think that's a testimony to the story it's telling and to the beautiful way that the story is told. It's directed by Sahim Ali. And there's choreography by Justin Peck and Patricia Delgado, and we'll talk more about both of them in just a bit. But let's start off with telling the true story behind the album, which came out in 1997 and could have been yours for a penny from Columbia House Records if you'd been me.
We're old, dude.
I know.
It just these things. We were talking about a pager. About
pagers. I saw your Instagram story today. Your pager.
Anyway.
Yes, exactly. We are old. So the album, like I said, is from 1997. It's called Buena Vista Social Club. The album was named after a now defunct club in Havana, Cuba. And the album consisted, when it came out in 1997, it was mostly Cuban standards. So these are Cuban songs that had been very popular in Cuba, Spanish language songs, prior to the Cuban Revolution. So we're looking pre-1959. These were songs from films. These were songs that would have played on Cuban radio. They were just really popular songs. So when the album came out in 1997, it was entirely new to me. But to anyone who'd been around Cuba in the 40s and 50s, this would have been the stuff that they knew off the top of their heads, right? It was very familiar, which is one of the reasons why it was so successful, because there was a lot of nostalgia wrapped up for those who already knew the music, right? And then for me, who didn't know the music, it was just kind of, it was just opened my eyes to a whole different sound. And that was really appealing to me. So it becomes, when it comes out, the best the best-selling fully Spanish album of all time. For a time, in fact, it was even on Rolling Stone's top 500 greatest albums of all time. They kind of update that from time to time. It was there. It was so popular. It won the 1998 Grammy Award for Best Traditional Tropical Latin Album, and it won a 1998 Billboard Latin Music Award as well. It sold nearly 10 million copies, and in 2022, it was selected by the Library of Congress to be preserved in the National Historic Registry. So this album was not only enormously popular, but it's enormously important because it preserves, like I said, these were the standards. These would have been the equivalent of, the Rodgers and Hart and Cole Porter and Irving Berlin and, all those guys and Dorothy Fields, who were writing popular music for the early to mid 20th century. This would be analogous to that for Cubans. So it's a really important piece of work. So it came about because a couple of producers, namely Nick Gold and Ry Cooder, went to Cuba in 1996. And their intent was to introduce these Cuban musicians, all of whom were like 60s, 70s, 80s years old. They had been recording pre-revolution. So these were the same folks. They got together the same folks that had been the great superstar musicians in Cuba pre-revolution. And they wanted to get them together with a group of West African musicians. A lot of these West African musicians, particularly from Mali, had been enormously impacted by that Afro-Cuban sound. And so the intent of Nick Gold and Ry Cooder when they went to Cuba in 1996 was to get the West Africans together with the Cubans and just,
see what happens.
See what happens let them
And then there's this is where you need a musicologist to kind of talk about transatlantic transmission, via colonialism and the slave trade and all of this other kind of stuff that comes, and all of a sudden the music starts morphing and changing into other things as another country's music from that they never would have ever had access to finds its way into the traditional music of the time, and being able to kind of trace those linkages back. But that would have been fascinating. It's like, okay, here's what I do. What do you do with this? Okay, can we do something together? Or can we figure out what is West African from what you're doing?
That's right.
And, there's a lot, where you see the similarities. It's question. Beautiful.
Yes, absolutely. So that's why they wanted to get them together. And I'm sure there was some thought, like I said, some of these Cuban musicians were in their 80s. So I'm sure there was some thought of, if we're going to do this, we need to do it now, right? Because we're going to lose these artists because they're 80 years old.
But how in the world are they getting to Cuba?
What's that?
How are they getting to Cuba? It's locked.
Well, that ends up being the problem. Oh. The West Africans were not able to get visas to get into Cuba. So they're not able to make it.
That doesn't
They're not
sound
able
right.
to make it. Right.
Okay.
So what ends up happening is you have music producers and you have musicians who, had been performing 30 years prior or 40 years prior at that point, and they're all getting together and reconnecting, some of them for the first time in a long time, and they're singing these favorite old standard Cuban songs together, and they're talking about songs that they wrote, whether on their own or together with other performers there. And so suddenly these Cubans are left with a record producer, a lot of music, and a studio space that they're not sharing with West Africans anymore, because the West Africans couldn't get into the country. And so they end up making this album, Buena Vista Social Club. It's not like they were a band called Buena Vista Social Club prior to that. It just happened to be that was a club in Havana where a lot of them had performed, and it became the name of the group. Yeah. So that recording is released in 1997. I've already mentioned a lot of the success that it had, but in addition to the Grammy and the Billboard Music Award and the almost 10 million albums that were sold, it leads in the immediate aftermath to a concert tour. There's a 1999 documentary about it. There's a show at Carnegie Hall. It kind of leads to this explosion of Cuban music, that sweeps the world. That album was everywhere.
But it's not just Cuban music. I mean,
right. That's right. It's performed by Cubans, but yeah.
No, I mean, this is just the contextual information about what's happening in the U.S. at that point. Huge emphasis on world music.
That's exactly right.
Coming out via CD. I don't remember a time other than late 90s into early 2000s where there was such a push where you could find music from Russia. You could find Enya was the big one.
Oh yes,
y'all. Enya. I always come back to Enya because everybody just loved her, and people.
Pretty sure I got her album the same way.
And it's but these were sounds that Americans hadn't heard or integrated into their consciousness, and it was like the entire country was like, there's
people beyond our borders
out there. This is fun. I quite enjoy it. And so, I mean, it's I was just coming out of high school into college, and I remember going to my aunt and uncle's house, going to, see family. And every time somebody would have a different world music thing on, it became a world music. So it was a really popular kind of motif then.
Yes.
But I do want to point out that, Enya was popular. I mean, all of these guys were popular in the general consciousness throughout the United States. But to be able to support something like a concert tour, be able to support, these kinds of accolades, it just reminds you how many expat Latin folks.
Yeah. Fair.
Specifically from Cuba. That, made their way to Miami and then all the way up the coast. How big that population is.
That's right.
And I think that is something that, it's another time where it's this big push towards y'all, like, everybody's culture has something to offer and is interesting. Mm-hmm. So let's explore them. And we had a big enough Cuban population to get it rolling. And then everybody else is like, oh, I like these. Yeah. But there are songs that, I was going back and listening to the music on the way in today, and I was like, oh, I know that song. I know that song. Oh, I know that song. Yes. But I know that song because of the 90s, not because I grew up listening to it.
That's right.
And I think that's a really interesting point. It's because in the late 90s, we started the push towards, diversity makes our life a little richer. Right. And that's where we were moving. But it was stuff like this. It was the music.
100%.
Like, if we think about it, be like, no more diversity of music. We're throwing all the world music. Can't be. We're just going to do American music. All we would have left is country, and not even then, because country is pulling from Australia now and from like a lot of Latin in country now. It's just really interesting how everything is
connected. Well, and you mentioned context, and that's very well taken. You're absolutely right. There was this explosion of world music. It was everywhere at that time. But also more specifically to Latin music was 1997. I think it was 97. It might have been 98. One of the two is when The Cape Man by Paul Simon was performed on Broadway. For a time, it was the biggest flop in Broadway history, but it was Paul Simon using world music that he himself had written. But nevertheless, it did not sound like, old school Paul Simon music. And he tells the story of a Puerto Rican gang member in Cape Man. And it's about a guy on a motorcycle who kills people. I mean, he runs over some people, I believe. But that was around this time, too, specifically on Broadway. So, and that was highly impactful. Lin-Manuel Miranda saw that show.
Yeah, I remember. And it was nobody enormous, saw that show,
but he did, and importantly enough, and that changed his life. That and seeing Rent changed his life, and we all know that his changed life changed Broadway, right? Yeah. So it's a really important time.
Another thing that happens around here that ties back to specifically Cuban music is the Alien Gonzalez debacle.
Right.
And I forgot I went, oh, wait, when is that? So,
gosh.
When he's 6 years old, so it's about 98, 99.
Okay.
So around kind of this time that it's coming out, this CD is coming out, we go through the Alien Gonzalez. If you don't remember that, there's a 6-year-old boy came, I think, with his mom across from Cuba, like
in a boat,
right? Boat, basically, and kind of swam for it for a while, and his father wanted him forcibly taken back to Cuba to him,
right?
And it was a huge standoff between the two countries. It was huge, and the propaganda around it was massive. It turned the country in a way that is still being kind of reconciled, I think, at this point, especially when you think back to those pictures of our, special forces going in to get him from his family in Miami and forcibly take him. But they've got, massive guns trying to go in and get him, and he's hiding in a closet, and there are pictures of this little kid just screaming his head off because he's terrified because these army men are taking him away. And that was deeply, deeply impactful for, I think, the United States, especially.
No doubt.
But it was one of those things where it very much demonized Cuba for doing it. It made lots of people mad for our participation in it, like why we allowed him to go back, like why we participated in that. But also just this idea of, this is all happening because of communism. right? And that nostalgia for the days before the fall of Cuba into communism, and like all of these little things. It's just really funny when you talk about this stuff. It's like, oh, look at this little thread. Oh, look at this little thread. All of these things are working together. That's just exploding this particular music.
Yep, that's a great point. So, years later, after the album comes out in 97 and it is so enormously successful, the man who owns the theatrical rights goes to Marco Ramirez, who's a Cuban-American writer I mentioned earlier, and he asks him a couple of questions. Now, the reason he went to Marco Ramirez is most notably because he's Cuban-American, so this, was near and dear to his heart, but he's also an incredibly accomplished writer. So let me give you some of his credits. He's written mostly for TV, Sons of Anarchy, Orange is the New Black, most recently Daredevil on Netflix. But he'd also written an off-Broadway play called The Royale, which played off-Broadway in 2016. And so he wins the Drama Desk and Helen Hayes nominations for that, as well as the Outer Critics Circle's John Gassner Playwriting Award. So he's an incredibly accomplished writer.
DC. That's why I know it. I was like,
that makes sense. One. Yeah. That makes sense. So he, was a perfect person for this producer to approach. And like I said, the first question that he asked was, do you know the album? Well, he was Cuban-American. His grandparents in their Miami home had played this song, and he was, growing up when this album was so enormously popular. So of course he knew the record and was actually familiar with a lot of the music because he'd heard it from his grandparents prior to the album coming out. Like I said, these were known songs. It's not like these were not all of them. There's a couple that were newer, but it's not like they were written for the album, right? So he was very much steeped in that music by way of his Cuban grandparents in their Miami home. So it was absolutely something that he knew very well. So after asking if he knew the record, the producer asked, is there a piece of theater here? And Ramirez really had to think long and hard about it. Obviously, the producer thought that there was because he'd bought the theatrical rights to it. But Ramirez thought about it, and his first step was to go to Cuba and to interview the people involved who were still alive. Now, not all of them are, but the ones who were still available to be interviewed, he chatted with. And, when he came back from that experience, he said, it's ultimately about a bunch of people who were given a magical opportunity to do a second take on their past, to make something right or just relive their youth. And what he means by that is, again, you've got these people who were performing together in the 40s and 50s, who were singing music around Cuba before the fall to communism in 1959. And when you gave them the chance to do this album in 1996, which was recorded in 96 and released in 97, they got to reconnect and relive all those times and reminisce about what that had been like. And so Ramirez realized there's a lot of power, right? Think of how strong nostalgia is. We've talked about it before, the power of nostalgia. That's why we see Back to the Future, the musical, and all those things that we see nowadays.
It's the nostalgia, folks.
That's right. Exactly.
We could make a t-shirt out of that.
Maybe we should. We need the Dr. Broadway Podcast merch.
There we go.
My shirt will just say, call Bob Martin.
Yes. That's awesome.
Anyway, so Ramirez decides, yes, there's definitely a story here. There's a piece of theater here. And so he gets to writing. And he took, like I said before, he took a lot of creative liberties, but essentially he tells the story of these performers. And the play uses a lot of flashbacks. So go in prepared for that. You're going to see 1956 and 1996. So you'll see a lot of flashbacks, which was a unique, I won't say problem, but a unique thing for the director and casting director to deal with, because they had to choose or cast two actors to play the same role. Yeah. But one had to be 40 years younger than the other, or at least play 40 years younger than the other. And
it's not like a Notebook thing where
right.
They're just using, they're trying to make sure that you're not getting lost in those flashbacks.
That's exactly right. And so once Ramirez had enough of a working script together, Sahim Ali came on as director. He had directed Fat Ham in 2023 and was nominated for a Tony for that direction. And then they also brought in, I mentioned them earlier, Justin Peck and Patricia Delgado as choreographers. Now, these guys are so important. When you see how much dance there is in the show, you'll understand why. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them. But Justin Peck and Patricia Delgado are a couple, real life couple. They're married. And Justin Peck started as a dancer, director, and choreographer for the New York City Ballet. So both he and his wife come from a ballet background. In fact, Peck was the second ever resident choreographer of the New York City Ballet after Christopher Wheeldon. And we talked about Christopher Wheeldon in our MJ episode. He directed MJ on Broadway, and before that had directed An American in Paris on Broadway. So Christopher Wheeldon kind of lays the tracks that Justin Peck followed in for him to make that transition from the ballet world into choreographing for Broadway. He won 3 Tony Awards for his choreography, the revival of Carousel in 2018, Illinois, and then, of course, Buena Vista Social Club. He will win a Tony Award for his work on this show. But he also notably did the dance sequences for the Steven Spielberg West Side Story film.
Yeah.
So he has done a lot of work that made him a really perfect candidate for this show. Well, his wife as well. Yeah, go ahead.
He worked with his wife on the Steven Spielberg thing. Okay.
He did. He was the choreographer. She was an assistant choreographer. Yep.
Yeah.
They worked together.
We're bringing her along because Peck and Delgado, just the last names tell me.
That's right. Well, that's right. She is Cuban herself.
There we go.
And I will tell you a little bit more about them, which I think this is so interesting. There is only one first dance, but the first dance at their wedding was a song from Buena Vista Social Club, the album.
Awesome.
I don't know if they got it from Columbia House Records, but
they may
have. They may have had my copy. I don't know, but they loved it, and that was the first dance for their wedding. So as soon as they heard about this project, they were like, "Can we be a part of it?" Well, of course they could, because they had not only the professional credits, but Patricia Delgado, the wife, is of Cuban descent as well, and from Miami. In fact, where Justin Peck starts at the New York City Ballet, Patricia Delgado starts at the Miami City Ballet.
There we go.
And then now she teaches part-time at Juilliard. She worked on the Broadway revival of West Side Story, and then was an associate choreographer on the film, as we've already discussed. So
she's pretty good.
Yeah, she knows her stuff just as well as he does.
And she's coming behind with all of the ethnic credibility.
That's exactly right. And in fact, she made what I think is one of the best points and one of the most important points to know about this show. Since the songs are in Spanish, which we've already said, Delgado said, a lot of our responsibility is to make the audience feel something through the universal language of dance. And you don't even have to understand what's being said. Yeah. And I thought that was such a key thing to point out, because the fact that it's the music is all in Spanish can be off-putting for some, but it absolutely should not be, because they make it, and clearly the fact that it's run for over a year can attest to this, but that they do it, by way of direction and choreography. You're not missing anything, right? There's no communication gap. Yeah. They make sure that things are communicated very clearly.
And obviously they did a good job of that, because you're not
That's right.
I mean, the first thing that reviews tell you is where people get confused. Right. And this has not been one of them.
Nope, that's exactly right.
I haven't seen a whole lot of confusion when it comes to this show at all. Like, everybody tracks just fine.
Yeah, agreed.
So, good for them.
That's right. Well, they end up winning the Tony for their choreography. The show wins 5 Tony Awards, but I'll get there. But one of them is for choreography. So clearly they did it right. So the show premieres off-Broadway in 2023 at the Atlantic Theater Company. And Jesse Green of the New York Times says it's full of riches, but like everything else, it needs work, right? Everything. That's just the way it goes.
All critics have to say something.
That's right.
They can't just say,
there is no perfect show. That's
go
right.
see it.
It'd be a really short review.
Yeah, I mean, they'd be out of a job so quick. That's another thing you got to remember about critics. They're getting paid.
That's right.
By the letter, I'm sure. So.
I'm sure. So that it's full of riches, but it needs work. So they go back to the drawing board and fix the things that need fixing. And then they open on Broadway in March of 2025, to be more specific. It's a $17 million production, which is, right on maybe a little bit on the low end now, but nevertheless keeps a pace with what's happening on Broadway. And then that production's nominated for, I think, 10. I may have miscounted, but I believe there were 10 Tony Awards, and it wins 5, including, like I've already mentioned, Best Choreographer and a special award for the musicians of the album, not the cast album, but the musicians of that 1997 album were given a special Tony Award, which is appropriate and good for them. So there you have it. That's Buena Vista Social Club. Now, this is one I told Tracey when we started talking today. This one's going to be a short one, but it's a short episode because we're at this. It's brand new, right? And we'll have more to say. Even if we did this time next year, we would probably have more to say. But at this point, we kind of have a short and sweet episode for you to close out season 2. And we think potentially. We've already been talking about other episodes we might need to record today. So
I'm like, okay.
We'll see when that happens. But at the moment, there's all you need to know about Buena Vista Social Club. I will tell you, this one's very high on my list. I have not seen it, but it is very high on the list of shows I really want to see. Tracey, your thoughts?
No, absolutely. Everything that I dig into as far as kind of watching audience response to this is that there hasn't been like any backlash necessarily. Like they have moved under the radar.
Yeah,
I will say
I think that's very fair. Yeah,
I'm not surprised by that, given the time that we're living in, given the circumstances that we're living in the moment. You don't see it. Having all of the big marketing pushes, but obviously it hasn't needed it because it continues to run.
That's right.
And that should tell us something. But I'm not seeing a whole lot of, people being like, I'm confused, I didn't like it. We're seeing lots of people who enjoyed themselves, and, recommend others see it. Lots of people kind of having to make or find peace with kind of the difference between nostalgia and reality, in moving between time periods and dealing with that kind of liminal space that where Americans kind of inserted themselves into Cuban history here in the middle, and where lots of people just kind of having to think through, like, why do I think what I think about Cuba, and where is that coming from, and not because the show is asking those questions necessarily. They are asking, I think, really thoughtful questions about tradition and somebody put it really, really well the other day. It's like history and memory, authenticity and performance. Like, what does authenticity mean, and all of that. That was Christopher Caggiano. At the Arts Fuse, that came up with those kind of qualifiers there. But, lots of people just saying, hey, you know what? I really like this. It made me think about things that had nothing to do with the play, about how we conceptualize our understanding of world music and things like that. And that is always great to see when you have a show that is not, on all the marketing, frenzies to try to, not necessarily to try to keep it open, but, to plug that name out there. And it's still running. It still seems to be running okay.
Yep.
Pretty strong.
That's right.
And now it's going out on tour.
It's going out on tour.
So if you buy this as a part of a season package, or even if you don't, go see it. It's going to take you back to a different time. You're going to recognize all of this music. I think that was the thing that I was the most surprised by, because I don't think I ever had this album. I had all the Enya ones, but I
had a few of those too.
I had the Nordic, our Nordic friends. But, I think that I was like, but I know all of these.
Yeah, they're very familiar.
Yeah, very familiar. And, you're not going to be like, I've never heard any of this. I'm so lost. It's very, very accessible. And that's the way it should be. Again, we talked about like Afro-Cuban conjunctions and how music is transmitted. This is kind of the same way, is where you're getting something that's essentially authentically Cuban at one point, brought into kind of an American space to record it, and now put on American stages with a whole lot of America in mind. Right. So you do have quite a bit of kind of these cultures crashing together, where you're going to find a lot of yourself in it as well. Yeah. So
absolutely. All right.
What a good
That'll
time.
do it. I think that'll do it, Tracey, right? That'll do it for this episode of the Dr. Broadway Podcast, and we think for this season of the Dr. Broadway Podcast. Spend the summer catching up on the episodes you've missed, and we'll be back in September with Season 3. Until then, connect with us via email at hello@drbroadway.com or on Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok at Dr. Bway Podcast.